So hello, everybody, and thanks so much for joining us today. My name is Nicole Lamberson. I was trained as a physician assistant, and I volunteer doing outreach for the film Medicating Normal, and I host conversations like the one we are going to have today. Our guest today is Dr. Peter Gøtzsche. Did I pronounce your last name correctly?
Gøtzsche.
Gøtzsche? Okay,
Gøtzsche,
I'll just
yes.
call you Peter because that's easier for me.
Yeah.
He's one of the experts featured in Medicating Normal. I'll read a quick bio for him. He graduated as a Master of Science in Biology and Chemistry in 1974 and as a physician in 1984. He's a specialist in internal medicine. He's worked in clinical trials and regulatory affairs in the drug industry from 1975 to 1983, and at hospitals in Copenhagen from 1984 to 1995. He co-founded the Cochrane Collaboration and established the Nordic Cochrane Center in 1993. He became Professor of Clinical Research Design and Analysis in 2010 at the University of Copenhagen, and has been a member of the Cochrane Governing Board twice. He co-founded the Council for Evidence-Based Psychiatry in the UK in 2014 and the International Institute for Psychiatric Drug Withdrawal in Sweden in 2016. He founded the Institute for Scientific Freedom in 2019. He currently works as a researcher, lecturer, author, and independent consultant. For example, in lawsuits, he is a visiting professor at the University of Newcastle. He's published more than 75 papers in the Big Five, which are like British Medical Journal, The Lancet, JAMA, etc. And his scientific works have been cited over 150,000 times. He's the author of several books. One is recent that we'll discuss some today. It's called Mental Health Survival Kit and Withdrawal from Psychiatric Drugs. It's available in 8 languages. And aside from his being featured as an expert in Medicating Normal, a documentary film about his reform work called Diagnosing Psychiatry appeared in 2017. Also, Peter has translated the film into Danish, which we are really excited about to be able to have that extra language for people to view. So thank you so much, Peter, for joining us today. You have contributed quite a bit to this space, so thank you so much for your work that you do.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I guess we'll just jump right into some questions. I guess in preparing for this interview, I read a whole lot of articles in your book, and something I discovered about you that I didn't know is that you used to be a pharmaceutical rep, which was kind of surprising to me. So maybe we should start at the beginning, how you came into your work around psychiatric medications and psychiatry. What led you to have interest in this topic to begin with?
Well, the basic issue is that I didn't know what to do with my education as a biologist. I had studied insects, and that is a very fascinating subject. And then my grandfather, who was a GP, he suggested I went into the drug industry. So that's why I became a salesperson. And this was the most humiliating experience in my entire life. I quickly realized that I needed to get out of that in order not to end somewhat like a salesman's death, the famous play by Arthur Miller, where you live on a lie. Because I discovered quite quickly that what I was told by the company was not correct. I was able to see behind the science, and therefore I started studying medicine. So that's how I ended up there. And the reason I came into psychiatry was a coincidence that someone I knew wanted to do a PhD in psychiatry, and I said, yes, great, let's do that. And I was immensely surprised when I dug into psychiatry. So I have worked a lot with that ever since. It's the only medical specialty I am aware of that indisputably does more harm than good. the way current psychiatry functions should be demolished completely and built up from scratch.
Mhm. Well, can I just say, I'm so glad that you didn't continue studying bugs, because we're so glad that you do the work that you do now. There's a really important paper that you co-authored. It's called "What is the Difference Between Dependence and Withdrawal Reactions? A Comparison Between Benzodiazepines and SSRIs." Is that the person that you were talking about that wanted to get into psychiatry, that you wrote that paper with?
Yes, and she had no previous knowledge of that area. She is a midwife, actually.
Mhm.
She just found it interesting, and her subject is history repeating itself, a comparison between benzodiazepines and SSRIs, the newer depression pills. And she showed in her thesis that this was indeed the case, that doctors and regulators, they would not accept that SSRIs also led to dependence, just like benzodiazepines. It took 20 years before they admitted this, and also decades before they admitted that benzos create dependence. So it's a huge scandal, really.
Mhm. Yeah, I noticed in the paper you all use the term dependence in the conclusion, that, referring to the reactions from benzodiazepines as a dependent syndrome and not SSRIs is not rational. But I wonder, is the language around these issues part of what creates some of the confusion, where I've heard people argue, like psychiatrists in the field say SSRIs are not addictive. And then other people will say they are addictive. But I think what they're meaning when they're defending that SSRIs are addictive is that they cause physical dependence in the same way the benzodiazepines do. But psychiatry will sometimes try to push back and say, no, they're not addictive. You don't see people buying them on the streets or trying to inject them, or I guess ruining their lives with the behaviors of addiction. So do you
Come
think?
on.
Go ahead.
This is just semantics.
Yeah.
And this has been worked out by the drug industry in order to put the new drugs in a better light than the benzodiazepines. Of course, they're addictive. They're also physically addictive. If you suddenly stop taking an SSRI, you can get horrible physical addiction symptoms, just as you can get such symptoms with benzodiazepines. And my PhD student, she showed that most of these symptoms are actually the same for benzodiazepines and SSRIs. So it's all rubbish, bullshit, and nonsense. Excuse me for my language, but I get angry that the patients are being deceived this way. I once lectured for more than 100 Danish psychiatrists, and then they told me that their bosses, the professors, told me that SSRIs are not addictive. And then I said, that's not true. Ask the patients, they know what happens. And then one of them said, oh, well, in order to be addictive for a drug, you need to crave larger and larger doses. And you know what I responded?
Right.
Great. Then nobody is addicted to cigarettes as long as they smoke a pack every day and don't crave more and more and more. They're not addictive. They can stop tomorrow. Excuse me, Nicole, but how can people be so dumb?
Yeah. I guess I just asked the question about terminology because I know that it's been used to deceive people. Like when they, instead of calling it withdrawal, they call it a discontinuation syndrome, I guess, because it's less alarming and sounds better.
Oh,
But
that was an invention by Eli Lilly, one of the worst companies.
Yeah. But as somebody who took benzodiazepines and psychiatric medications myself and fell into this trap, I remember knowing that benzodiazepines were addictive, but I sort of felt safe in taking them because the term addictive made me think of drug abuse. So it's like if you're taking an opioid for a surgery or something, you might see on the label that it says these can be habit forming or they can be addictive, but I think patients feel this false sense of security with the word addictive, that it's so
Yeah.
long as they're not abusing them, they should be okay to take.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe something with the language. I know when we talk about benzodiazepines, we say physical dependence, and we do that because we've also noticed that practicing physicians will cut people off of their benzos if they feel they're addicted. But if we say, oh no, this is a physiological or physical dependence problem, they're more comfortable writing prescriptions to facilitate a long taper.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So you have a new book. It's called Mental Health Survival Kit and Withdrawal from Psychiatric Drugs, a user's guide, and we'll post a link to it in the comments. And just briefly to introduce the book, I guess, who did you write it for? Who do you think should read it? And what can people expect if they purchase it and read it themselves?
Every single doctor who ever prescribes a psychiatric drug should read a book like mine or another similar book, because doctors know far too little about psychiatric drugs. Even the psychiatrists know far too little about the drugs they use every day. Also recently, I hear from patients who tell me, well, my psychiatrist told me I can just stop from one day to the next with my fluoxetine or whatever I'm taking. And this is horrific. I mean, this is dangerous. In the worst case, they might kill themselves or someone they love because of these withdrawal symptoms. So the lack of knowledge is just incredible. And we have had a long fight through the Council for Evidence-Based Psychiatry in the UK with the Royal Society of Psychiatry in the UK, who, that organization continued to claim that when you stop SSRIs, well, you might get some symptoms, but they will be over in about 2 weeks. And this is horribly, horribly wrong.
Yeah.
So this organization took the Royal College of Psychiatry to task, and they even had a survey among patients that told them that this is incredibly wrong. But as soon as they got criticized, they took down this survey from their website because it was just too embarrassing. This is not how you should behave professionally towards your patients. It's very bad behavior.
Yeah. So really, you want doctors to read the book. You want people already taking psychiatric medications to read the book, and also potential patients, people who are considering.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course. Now I got carried away with how little the doctors know about this. But of course, the main target audience is the patients. If they read my book, they will know far more than most doctors know about psychiatric drugs, and particularly how you taper off them slowly and safely.
Yeah. Okay. So at the start of that book, you mentioned that some patients call themselves psychiatric survivors, and that we never hear of patients calling themselves survivors of other specialties of medicine, like I'm a cardiology survivor. But again, being in this community and being around some of the mainstream psychiatrists, I've heard their sort of rebuttal to that comment when it's pointed out that psychiatric medications carry serious risks and they can cause immense harm. What they say is, well, other specialties use medications or perform procedures that also carry risks. So their point is that all medical interventions carry risk regardless of specialty. So psychiatry is no different. What would you say to that?
It's entirely different.
Mhm.
If you use a drug for cancer, you will, of course, kill some of the patients because they might get an infection and die from that,
Mhm.
for example. But you save more lives than you lose. And therefore, the net benefit is positive. Otherwise, you would not use that cancer drug. It's the same in cardiology. It's the same all over medicine. But again, psychiatry is an outlying exception because psychiatric drugs definitely kill far more people than they save. I have much difficulty finding anyone that they save at any time, but they kill an enormous amount of patients. I have estimated that psychiatric drugs are the third leading cause of death after heart disease and cancer.
Wow.
And that's based on the best science I could find, and it might be an exaggeration, but there is no doubt that psychiatric drugs kill an enormous amount of patients. So this comparison is just plain wrong, as most of the things psychiatrists say in defense of their specialty are plain wrong.
Mhm. But to be clear, you're not saying that in other specialties of medicine, there's not, harmful drugs that are not efficacious or that are overprescribed or that we shouldn't be using.
Oh, of course,
Yeah.
there is a problem throughout healthcare that since capitalism is the big thing, and since drug companies, they earn a lot of money by cheating and by committing organized crime,
Mm.
then people use far too many drugs. And this is the reason that our prescription drugs are the third leading cause of death after heart disease and cancer. And most of these people who died, they even didn't need the drugs that killed them. And psychiatric drugs play a very important role here, as I just said. But also arthritis drugs and a lot of other drugs kill an enormous amount of people. So we have problems all over healthcare, but psychiatry is the only area I am aware of where there can be no discussion that it would be an advantage for the patients if they did not use psychiatric drugs at all compared to what the usage is today.
Wow. Okay. So in chapter 2 of your book, you examine if psychiatric diagnoses are scientific or reliable. And you
Yes.
mentioned that patients would come up to you and identify themselves as having something. So I have ADHD, they would say. And you would in the book, you said you would respond, no, you don't. And that's a social construct. Can you talk a little bit about what you mean by that?
Yes, but first I will say that my first psychiatric book, which is called Deadly Psychiatry and Organized Denial, because the psychiatrists, they deny all the harms. I explain in much detail in that book why psychiatric diagnoses are highly unscientific. That if you ask 5 psychiatrists to talk to the same patients, not at the same time, but independently, these patients will get different diagnoses. And if you subject normal people to these diagnostic tests, many of us would get one or more psychiatric diagnoses. And I can give you an example. My whole family qualifies for the adult ADHD diagnosis, which is totally ridiculous. And this is only because we are quite energetic people that don't like just to sit still, for example.
Yeah.
And the ADHD diagnosis is particularly unscientific. And when people tell me when I lecture that I have ADHD, I tell them, no, you haven't. You cannot have ADHD. You can have a dog, a car, or a boyfriend, a girlfriend. You cannot have ADHD because it's just a name. So you have people with certain qualities, psychological qualities, and if you have these some of these qualities, you give them a name, but it's not something that is existing in nature like an elephant or a giraffe or a car.
Yeah.
But people misinterpret this, and then they think, oh, now I have an explanation why I have these difficulties, because the explanation is ADHD. It's not, it's just a name.
Mhm.
That should be very clear.
Yeah. I wonder sometimes, like when I tell my story of harm from psychiatric medications, oftentimes the people who are still, who buy into their diagnoses or who are still taking medications, there's a lot of pushback. They don't like hearing about the harms. And I wonder if, along the same lines of us talking about this social construct and people saying, I have ADHD or I have depression, if it becomes sort of like an identity, these diagnoses for people, and maybe that's part of like the marketing plan or the no stigma type campaigns that are launched, do you think?
Well, but it has the opposite effect,
Mm-hmm.
that people do get stigmatized by getting labeled.
Mm-hmm.
And this is particularly a problem if people get a label of schizophrenia, because then they run the risk that other people get afraid of them, become afraid of them. And so even the National Institute of Mental Health has now gone away from the diagnosis schizophrenia, because it is very difficult and doubtful, and it's sometimes given to people that you and I would not think had a serious psychiatric disorder, but maybe they are hearing voices. Many normal people hear voices without this being a problem for them.
Mm-hmm.
And so we should get away from using psychiatric diagnosis and instead think about, what is that person in front of me? What is his or her current problem? What has happened to that person, instead of using labels? Because if we start using labels, they are so unscientific. So the same person often gets several labels, and then they have a whole collection of psychiatric diagnoses.
Gotcha. So later in the book, you talk about anecdotes, and I write sometimes about my experience in specifically in this blog called Kevin MD. I don't know if you've ever heard about it, but it's in the United States. And every time I tell my story or the story of someone else, harmed by, I think the story that I'm thinking of was benzodiazepines. This one particular physician, he'll comment and say, this is what he said: "Thank you for these anecdotes. However, the plural of anecdote is not data. This is why physicians are trained to interpret the results of well-designed studies and not practice based on these types of stories. Clearly, there are people that have adverse events from any drug, no matter how helpful and safe it is, for the vast majority. No one is forced to take anything they feel is harmful. Every patient should be well informed about risks and benefits of any treatment. Let's make sure that valuable treatments remain available for those who need them."
Oh my goodness.
The more I thought about this, though, like the
No,
anecdote thing, that's
no,
just anecdote whenever
no.
someone is harmed by psychiatric medications. Like, isn't
It,
it anecdote when we go
it,
into the office and say, I feel depressed, and they believe
oh,
you and write you a prescription and give you a
oh,
diagnosis?
yes.
Yeah.
You gave me such a mouthful there of
Sorry.
wrong information from that
Yeah.
foolish physician that I will need to reject it one thing at a time.
Mhm.
First of all, it's absolutely idiotic to somehow say that anecdotes don't count. As you say, when a doctor sees a new patient, this could be called an anecdote.
Yeah.
So if they don't believe in anecdotes, how do they treat patients?
Mhm.
But of course, what he thinks is that we need randomized trials to find out if drugs work and so on. And that's quite okay. We all acknowledge this. But to dismiss what patients experience, then you are not only a bad doctor, you're also a bad researcher, because Many breakthroughs in research have come from exactly that, from anecdotes, that you start to wonder, why was it more than one person who developed myocarditis after a COVID-19 vaccine? That was also an anecdote, but now there are more and more people. And now we have accepted that, yes, these vaccines do give myocarditis, which in rare cases can be fatal. But it started as anecdotes. And this foolish doctor just thinks we should dismiss that. Of course, we shouldn't. And harms are very poorly elucidated in randomized trials. The drug industry doesn't like to find them, so they try to avoid finding them. And also for this reason, it's incredibly important to listen to the harms patients come and tell us about. These are very valuable anecdotes. Yeah. And then the other thing that doctor said about that, oh yes, and we don't, it's voluntary to take these drugs. I mean, this is nonsense. Many people get forced medication. And in many countries, including mine, even though it's illegal to tell a patient that if you don't take your depression pill, you will lose social benefits. That's totally illegal. But it is being abused even in my country, even though it's against the law. And you have the same with these poor children who are given Ritalin, that in order for the school to get additional benefits, economic compensation, they need these damned diagnoses. It's very bad.
Yeah. So basically, you know, what you're saying is if there's enough, if anecdote is overwhelming, we need to apply scientific rigor, and an anecdote is very valuable.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
What about sexual disturbances from depression pills? That also started as anecdotes. Oh, you are probably just stressed or whatever. No. Around half of people on I don't like to call them antidepressants because they don't work for depression really. So I call them depression pills. Yeah. I don't give any promises by calling them depression pills. Now, they do create sexual disturbances in about half of those who take them. But it started with anecdotes. And today we also know that some people will get permanently sexually harmed, even many months or years after they stop these pills. Some of the patients still cannot get an orgasm, which started when they started with the pills. This is permanent harm. And that also started with anecdotes that were disbelieved by doctors. I can guarantee you that this was rejected by doctors when it started unfolding. Yeah.
Okay. So I was glad to see in the book you talked about a concept called medication spellbinding. Can you tell people what that is? And you said in the book it can interfere with the effectiveness of psychotherapy.
Yes, it was psychiatrist Peter Breggin from New York State who invented this term medication spellbinding. And it is a wonderful term. Because what it is about is that when you're under drug influence, you are no longer capable of evaluating yourself in the same way as if you were not under drug influence. And everybody knows this from alcohol. When you have drank too much alcohol, you might think that you are perfectly capable of driving back home, but your friends might take the car keys from you because they can see you are not able to evaluate your own capability. Yeah, it's gone. And it's the same with psychiatric drugs, that when you have been on them for a while, you have become another person because they have changed your brain. And then you might also forget what it was like when you were not under drug influence. And you tend to believe that these drugs are helpful, because if you don't believe that, then you have a problem because you have perhaps taken them for several years. So you try to convince yourself, perhaps even subconsciously, that of course they have helped me.
Mhm.
And this is part of this medication spellbinding. And this is one reason why some patients have difficulty withdrawing from psychiatric drugs, that when they come down to a very low dose, they might be reluctant to cut it all together, the last little dose, because it almost looks dangerous for some of them. Because what will happen if I don't get the drug I have taken for 5 years?
Mhm.
That's pretty understandable.
Yeah. Well, and it's reinforced by the psychiatrist who's been prescribing it the whole time too,
Oh,
saying
yeah.
you're mentally ill, you need these medications for
Oh,
sometimes
yeah.
the rest of your life, the patients are told. Yeah.
Oh, but that's one of the worst things in, well, I don't know what is worst in psychiatry. What is worst is that they kill so many patients. But this is also very bad, that this still happens, that psychiatrists say two things.
Mhm.
Some psychiatrists still say that, for example, schizophrenia is an incurable disease and you will have it for the rest of your life. This is not true. Some patients become completely healthy. And the next thing they say is that you need these drugs for the rest of your life, which is extremely bad advice. If you take psychiatric drugs for many years, you are likely to introduce irreversible brain damage. And we know this very clearly from psychosis pills, of course, which are very, very harmful in the long run. But also the other drugs are harmful in the long run. For example, ADHD drugs like Ritalin, a long-term follow-up of a big American NIH-funded study showed that those children who took all their pills for many years, they were 5 centimeters shorter than those children who took very little of their pills. And then when they have such dramatic effects on weight and length increase during childhood, then I wonder what happens to these poor children's brains, which is what they are intended to work on. It's really, really scary.
Yeah. Yeah. So at the end of the book, you write about how some psychiatrists feel like they're stuck in a sick system and they reach out to you, but there's consequences for doing so if they challenge the status quo in any way. So I'm just curious, do you get lots of correspondence from psychiatrists and, even GPs who voice that they agree with you that the system is just so broken and they want to change, but they're afraid to speak out about it or to do anything?
I get more emails from patients actually from all over the world who are desperate and ask for help. And then I alert them to one of my 2 websites called Deadly Medicines and Organized Crime, which was a title for the book I published 9 years ago. To the right on the opening screen, I have advice on people they can contact in other countries that can help them withdraw from their psychiatric drugs, for example. And of course, I also get emails from professionals, from colleagues, but by far most emails I get are from a UK organization called Critical Psychiatry Network, which mainly consists of psychiatrists, but I'm also a member there. And these psychiatrists, they try to help young psychiatrists in education who cannot do what they feel is most appropriate to do because their bosses tell them that they must adhere to the guidelines at the department, and some of them have been threatened when they slowly withdrew psychiatric drugs from the boss's patients who they had taken over. And then they contact me and are deeply unhappy and want to leave psychiatry. And then I tell them, no, you shouldn't. You are exactly the type of psychiatrist that the patients need so badly.
Yeah. Yeah. They should stay and help people.
Yeah.
Um, Also, in your book, you mentioned meeting Luke Montague, who I think he co-founded Council for Evidence-Based Psychiatry with you,
Oh, yeah.
correct? Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Okay. So you said when you met him and he explained his story to you, he took psychiatric medications and had horrific withdrawal syndrome from them. That I don't remember exactly what you said, but something that it was like so severe and long lasting that you almost like didn't believe it, what he was telling you.
Yes.
So I'm just thinking, are doctors responsible then for, for not seeing or believing this, since they've almost been sort of trained not to see it? I mean, are they victims too of the training? Or is the crime really when the patient presents with this, not believing them or refusing to learn?
Well, one thing we need to realize, I have also had clinical practice at hospitals in Copenhagen.
Mhm.
We, as doctors, we sometimes meet patients where we think these symptoms are not real. These are something that goes on in the patient's head. They should start thinking about something else than inventing all sorts of symptoms. I mean, sometimes we have bowel sounds and they are totally innocent, but some patients exaggerate this and think they might have cancer and I don't know what. So all doctors know that there are some patients that are like that
Mhm.
and whom you should not subject to all sorts of diagnostic investigations because it will lead nowhere.
Yeah.
You need to deal with this psychologically.
Mhm.
But having said this, I must still say that you really need, as point one, to take what patients tell you seriously.
Mhm.
Sometimes it's not correct, but most of the time it is really something you should take seriously. But when Luke Montague told me about his symptoms that continued several years after he stopped with the benzodiazepine,
Mhm.
it was so different from anything I had learned in medical school that I thought, my goodness, is Luke not exaggerating? I had never heard anything like that before.
Yeah.
So it takes you many years to penetrate the jungle of psychiatry and realize what is wrong with it and realize that what patients tell you is generally frighteningly correct.
Yeah. I just wonder though, Peter, then if the symptoms, and I've experienced them firsthand, horrific withdrawal, can we ever give people informed consent then if most doctors don't even understand how bad and how long these things can go on for? You know, like that doctor, I just read you what he said in response to my anecdote thing about, well, if patients are just given the risks and the harms before they take the medicine, but how can we give them that if you're not really telling them
Oh,
like what
oh,
Luke told you happened to him,
oh my goodness, this is a total sham.
Yeah. Yeah.
Neither you nor I believe that many patients are told the truth about psychiatric drugs.
Yeah.
First of all, because many psychiatrists, they deny the harms of these drugs, then they can't inform the patients about them. So informed consent is an illusion when
Mhm.
it comes to saying yes to a psychiatric drug. It must be extremely rare that a patient is being told everything that patient needs to know in order to say genuinely yes or no to the risk of taking a psychiatric drug.
Yeah. Well, I guess that's why they should read your book then if they're considering. That's it probably as close to informed consent, or
Well,
going in some of the forums of
oh,
the patient forums and looking at what
but
patients are experiencing.
no, patients should just say no
Yeah.
to psychiatric drugs.
Yeah.
There are some rare exceptions.
Mhm.
If you are totally devastated, if you lost your child in a traffic accident or whatever, and you can't sleep, and everything is totally horrible, then of course you might need a benzodiazepine to get a little sleep.
Yeah.
Because if you don't sleep for several days, you run a risk of developing a psychosis.
Yeah.
So sleep deprivation, serious sleep deprivation, is not good for you.
Mhm.
So there are some rare cases where you can use a psychiatric drug, but the big thing is that you should virtually never take a psychiatric drug.
Mhm.
And if you take one, then it should only be in very acute situations, and it should be you who decide, and not doctors. It should not be forced treatment.
Mhm.
It's a huge human rights violation that you can force psychiatric drugs on people that kill many of them.
Mhm. Okay. So my last question about the book is, what do you say to people who say, oh my goodness, by publishing this information and warning people, you're going to scare people away who might need these drugs or who might need this psychiatric treatment, or in some cases, psychiatric drugs save lives. What is your
They
response?
don't. They don't. There are rare exceptions. If you get psychosis pills to such an extent that you become a total zombie,
Mhm.
unable to kill yourself, which was your plan, then of course you could say that by becoming a zombie, these pills have saved your life. But I mean, that's not really the way we want to have a healthcare, rendering people totally, what should I say? Yeah, zombie-like. And we should warn against psychiatric drugs as much as we can. Apart from these rare acute situations, they should not be used, because even the randomized trials have not really found worthwhile clinical effects of depression pills and psychosis pills and ADHD drugs. They are definitely harmful in the long run, and you could go on like that. Benzodiazepines are harmful if you take them for more than a few days. So it's the same all over the place. We need to warn as much as we can.
Yeah. Okay. So one of the presentations you did that I really loved was for CrossFit. We can put it in the comments for people watching. And you talked about how um, you were expelled from Cochrane collaboration. And you have a book about that too that people should read. It's called Death of a Whistleblower and Cochrane's Moral Collapse, which we'll
Oh,
put.
I have
Yeah.
one more. I
Oh,
have one
okay.
more. I just 2 months ago, I published a book called Decline and Fall of the Cochrane Empire.
Okay.
And this is freely available from my website.
Okay. So we'll put that one in the comments too. But for those who don't know, Cochrane was one of the world's most trusted, non-biased scientific institutions. And you pointed out in your presentation, basically, that Cochrane has started to become too close to industry. They don't want to disturb their big funders. And in that presentation, there was an audience member, I think he was a physician. He asked you a really important question. So for people who were turning to Cochrane for information about whether interventions in medicine were efficacious or worthwhile, if Cochrane is now having these problems, where do we turn for information that we can trust?
Well, surely Cochrane reviews of psychiatric drugs, almost every single one of them, is quite seriously flawed, because the trials are flawed. And then the reviews are also flawed, because those who write the reviews, they are not sufficiently critical. So you should not look to Cochrane if you're interested in psychiatric drugs, but as I said before, you shouldn't take them. So it's not a big problem. Just forget about them.
Yeah.
So what about other drugs? Well, sometimes Cochrane gets it right, even though most drug trials are financed by the drug industry.
Mhm.
So it is still useful to look in the Cochrane library, but as with all science, you should be critical. And one thing I recommend to patients is that if they get a prescription from a doctor, they should go on the FDA website, if they are in America, and read the package insert about that drug, because they might get really scared when they see all the harms that this drug has. So maybe they will conclude that it's maybe not that important that they go and start taking this drug.
Yeah.
So this is also something you can do. Do some research for yourself. That I would recommend.
Okay. Now, for people who've been harmed by psychiatric medications, I think we sort of like look behind the curtain for the first time and realize, well, if there's this much corruption and the data is so flawed in psychiatric care, surely it's in all of medicine as well. So we start reading and we get your book that you wrote on mammograms, and we decide we're not getting mammograms, and we read about, what you've written about flu shots, et cetera. But then we present that to our physicians or our family members, and people think we're just like these crazy conspiracy theorists, because most people, I think, they just go to the doctor and they do what the doctor tells them to do. So, I mean, what advice do you have for a patient who has done all the research, like you said, for themselves, and they don't want these interventions, or they're trying to make a case for not doing it?
My first advice is that if your doctor starts talking about conspiracy theories because you are critical towards drugs, then you should immediately find yourself a better doctor.
Yeah.
This is very, very primitive. This is saying, I don't want to discuss anything. So they might also call you a Scientologist or whatever, which is equally nonsense, equally much nonsense. Because they just don't want to discuss. And about flu shots, I have researched that a great deal, and I've also written a book about vaccines, and now I've written a new book about the COVID-19 cover-up, the Chinese-US cover-up for the origin of the COVID-19 vaccine, which is also freely available. I just published it 2 days ago, in fact.
Yeah.
Now, my wife is a professor of clinical microbiology, and I have a background in infectious diseases. Neither of us have taken a flu shot ever. And there are many good reasons why we won't do it.
Yeah.
Because these flu shots have quite poor effect. That's one of the main reasons, but they also increase the risk of getting influenza with another strain compared to people who have not been vaccinated. This has been shown by Canadian researchers.
Yeah, I was just curious your thoughts on that, because, every time in America anyways, every time you go to the doctor, it's, have you had your flu shot? Why not? There's a lot of pressure to get these interventions. Have you had your mammogram? Why not? And if you say you don't want something.
Wait a minute. If a doctor asks you that, you should say, have you forgotten why I came here? I have a sore knee. That's why I come to see you. It has nothing to do with flu shots or mammograms.
Yeah.
Just say that.
Okay. Thank you. I'll try that next time, Peter. I'm not sure if people know, but one of my favorite things you've done, and we can put a link to it in the comments, is your Daily Show appearance, where you played the role of Deep Throat, and you were basically an insider informant revealing secrets about big pharma. It made me laugh a lot, especially the part about when they went into the Pfizer's lobby asking to talk to the Don. But you asked in the piece if you were afraid someone was going to come after you. And I remember hearing somewhere, I don't know if it was a rumor or what, that some of the bigger names in this movement, like people had taken out extra life insurance and that kind of thing for talking about these issues. Is that really true? Is there some fear that there's danger in speaking out about psychiatry and the harms of psychiatric medications?
Well, the drug industry is highly criminal, but I am not aware of any cases where they have ordered a murder on someone.
Yeah.
So I would not be worried about this. I hope that this episode from The Daily Show can still be found in the United States, because it was hilariously funny to participate in that.
It was really great, Peter. Yeah. Okay, so let's see if we have any, I think we have like 7 minutes left here. If we have any questions from the audience. Somebody said, it's so depressing to know doctors know so little about medication. You tell your friends and family and they're all brainwashed to believe in psychiatrists too. That makes this so isolating. Okay, somebody wants to know, should a patient withdraw slowly if they have severe dyskinesia symptoms, or should they get off faster as to cause less damage and less chance of permanence?
Well, if they have very severe symptoms, for example, like akathisia, where they cannot sit still and feel some inner turmoil, this is a dangerous condition that predisposes to suicide and violence. And you mentioned dyskinesia, that's related to that sometimes. Then you may have a situation where you should try to withdraw much faster than you would usually do, because your current situation can be dangerous.
Yeah.
But you really need good professional help in that situation. Or you need someone to help you, actually, for all patients who are going through withdrawal. You need someone to support you.
Yes. Okay. Somebody wants to know if you've heard about the new DSM and how they're calling grief, prolonged grief disorder, is their latest diagnosis.
Oh yes, the DSM has become more and more ridiculous for every new version. And they introduced something a while ago. I haven't seen, have they made a quite new version now again?
It's the only thing that's different. So they're coming out with a new version, but the only thing that's different is this prolonged grief disorder. Oh,
well, come on. In DSM-5, they had a criterion that you were only allowed to be sorry for 2 weeks. If you had lost your husband or wife, then it was too long, and then you might be depressed. I mean, this is a natural condition.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think anybody who's experienced severe grief knows that it can go on for quite some time.
For many years. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yes. But listen, drugs cannot help you with that. Absolutely not.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I always try to think about it like it exists in our body, I think, for a reason, right? Like if we weren't meant to grieve, we wouldn't, but we do. And so it's got to be some kind of a evolutionary like healing process or something for us.
Yes.
Okay. This person says, I want to know if Peter's aware that depression pills can affect HPG axis in men and women and sperm quality. 2 endocrinologist professors have said it to me now, and I'm just trying to get the word out to one of you guys.
I have not studied this particular issue.
Okay, got it. All right, well, I think we'll close with one last question. Since you wrote the book Mental Health Survival Kit, the month of May is called Mental Health Awareness Month. I'm not sure if you knew that, but we want people, of course, to be mentally healthy. But we know that month is co-opted by, pharma funded organizations like NAMI and that kind of thing, who are going to try to use it to push pills and that kind of thing. So let's say, Peter, you had a huge platform for Mental Health Awareness Month and everybody's tuning in to hear what you want to say. What would your message be for May's Mental Health Awareness Month?
I will cite Peter Breggin, who invented the medication spellbinding concept.
Mm-hmm.
I actually cite him in my newest psychiatry book, that if you have a psychiatric or psychological problem, seeing a psychiatrist may be the worst mistake you made in your whole life.
Yeah.
That's what psychiatry is like today.
Yeah. Okay. So I think we can start to close now. Peter, if people want to find your books or your work, or they want to learn more about your organizations that you're a part of, where can they go to find you?
Can I share the screen?
Yeah,
can
sure.
I press here? Share screen?
Let me make sure that you have
the
ability.
You disabled it. You need to enable it.
Okay, try now.
I clicked on it now, and then I will find, oh my goodness, how do I find my, among all this? Wait a minute. Now, if I go up there, and I actually opened it, more than meetings, that's not, here it is. Can you see it?
No, I think you have to, when you hit share screen, you have to select what you're trying to share.
Okay, let me go back then. Share screen, but how? Oh, there it was. Share.
There you go. Let's see.
This is one of my 2 homepages for the Institute for Scientific Freedom, and there you can see my books.
Okay. Great. Is there another website you want people to be aware of as well, or just this one?
No, there is the other one, Deadly Medicines and Organized Crime.
Okay.
Where you can see to the right, help for psychiatric drug withdrawal.
Mm-hmm.
And also that I provide help in lawsuits against psychiatrists and drug companies. Yeah.
Okay.
But there is advice here, and names from many countries, also people who helped patients in all countries via Zoom, for example.
Right. Okay, great. So if anybody's experiencing difficulties with psychiatric medications and that kind of thing, those are great resources.
Yeah.
Okay. So before we go, Peter, then do you have any closing thoughts before I read a short little spiel about the film?
No, you came well prepared and asked me good questions, and I have said the most important things.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to say thank you.
Yeah, thank you for coming, Peter. And thank you so much for all of your great work in this space. I know I speak for everybody who has been harmed by psychiatric medications. We're just so glad that we have you at the helm and doing this super important work. I've been a fan of your work, not just with psychiatric medications, but all of medicine. And it's really important and impactful. And we're just grateful for you. So thanks, Peter.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. So thanks everybody so much for joining us for this discussion. If you have not yet seen Medicating Normal, you can go to our website at medicatingnormal.com/watch for the many ways you can watch it. We're currently on Vimeo and Amazon, and we're also airing on PBS and the PBS app. We're working on securing even more platforms to host the film as we speak. You can check on our events tab on Facebook to see more scheduled upcoming interviews like this one. And lastly, if you'd like to support our outreach efforts to bring the film and conversations like these to communities worldwide, you can make a donation at medicatingnormal.com/donate. Thanks again, everyone, for joining us today. Thank you again so much, Peter. You're a true scientific hero. And yeah, goodbye, everybody. We'll talk soon. Take care, Peter.